do you do?
We are in the business of mining nickel. Right now, we're not in production, but the company's goal and objective is to supply the key ingredients in the EV battery space from Canada, which is environmentally, socially responsible. So
you'll be mining nickel from Canada. Do you have a mine now?
So we have a deposit with over $40 million of expenditures in there. It's an advanced deposit that has over 1 billion pounds of nickel. That's enough to support 10 million Tesla cars. 1 billion pounds.
Oh, right.
Nickel. Yes.
Wow. And where's that located?
That is located in the second largest nickel camp in North America. It's a place called Thompson. Thompson is majority owned and operated by Vale, as you know. That's the largest nickel miner in the world. So Vale acquired Inco. It's a bit of a long history, 15 years ago, and they acquired 3 major nickel camp in Canada. That's Voisey's Bay, Sudbury, and Thompson. So we carved out a very prospective area in Thompson, of which we're jointly operating with Vale, just the two of us.
Right. And so why are you in Mongolia then if everything's happening in Canada?
Yeah, it's a long story, but Sam, I've been in the mining industry for 12 years. And over the 12 years, we've acquired several assets all around the world. And in March of this year, 4 months ago, we split the company 5 ways. So we have the nickel assets called Fly Nickel, sitting in a Fly Nickel company dedicated to EV and clean nickel. And we have a company called Mega Coal that's dedicated to provide coal in Mongolia and in China. And by the way, Sam, they don't have EV, they don't have batteries. In minus 40-degree weather, if you don't have power, you die. So I think sometimes you got to put things in perspective in how green you really want to go. And then we have a silver project in Bolivia, we have a vanadium project in Nevada, and then we have silver project in Nevada, nickel in Canada. If we were to move away from the EV, look at the nickel market. I mean, nickel is not all about EVs. The current nickel market, only 8%, maybe 5 to 8%, depending on sort of how up to date you are on this data points, are EVs, right? And so in spite of that, nickel is in a deficit. So I think nickel is obviously EV has got something to do with that. But even if the projection of say by 2030, depending on who you say, McKinsey or Bloomberg, you might see 30 or 40 million EVs on the road per year. If you cut that by half, just say 15 million, and if that half of that is nickel powered, you're still looking at additional 10 to 15% increase of nickel demand in the EV space. Where's that nickel going to come from, Sam? And in fact, I would say, maybe nickel is the place where it needs to be, because if every EV needs to have nickel, then nickel is not going to be. Then you're looking at doubling the nickel supply, require nickel supply to double. And I just don't think that the nickel market is kind of a place to do that, especially given 60% of nickel is coming from laterite. And I don't think any of that nickel is going to go into EV battery. If you look at that nutritional table that we talked about in the carbon footprints.
Where is the majority of nickel going right now?
80% is stainless steel. So if you look at all your utensils, stainless steel. Okay. It's a fancier version of non-corrosive, non-rust. If you look at who are the long side, it was Volkswagen and Goldman Sachs. And if you look at who are the short side, it was the Chinese and the Trapegoras. And but the short takeaway, Sam, is there are some long-term, non-speculative players that are in the nickel futures market, which means that they are more permanent presence. They're not going to be easily shaken out. And I think gradually, even though there's some short-term volatility in the futures market, I think over the long haul, you're going to see, over time, people are going to steadily eat away, establish that long-term position in the nickel market. So right now there's a big volatility right now, but I think in the long term, there's really not a lot to lose in nickel right now.
So what are you planning on doing over the next 5 years with how is this going to help your goals? Like, what's your plan going forward in the next 5 years?
Well, Sam, in terms of our plan for the next 5 years, the mandate is quite clear, right? It's to supply the key ingredient in the electric vehicle battery space. And our product is 100% made in Canada with a stringent environmental requirement. And just one more point is in the province of Manitoba, where Thompson is based, the power is 97% hydropower. So that is a big difference from say coal-fired power plants in Indonesia or in Philippines, and that will make the product coming out of Thompson probably the lowest carbon footprint of all nickel in the world. And secondly, Sam,
are they delivering now, or is that?
No, the project is at the final permitting stage, so it's taken about 10 years. And so if you look about, that's why we're quite bullish on nickel, because given the current COVID environment and environmental standards, it's taken us almost 10 years to get to where we are, Sam. So if you were to make a discovery, if you drill or make a nickel discovery, it's going to take you 10 years from technical studies, from reserve proven preparation, drilling, exploration, and permitting environments, social community. It's going to take 10 years to get to where we are. Sam, so we're at this final stage. The project's going to need hundreds of millions of dollars to put the mine into production. So we're going to have a bit of a nickel run up, and we're going to de-risk the project as much as we can, and then look to catch on the moment where you have a nickel run up. The company is in discussion on a confidential basis with several major auto manufacturers and battery manufacturers. And the good news is, Sam, as you said, we have some industry knowledge, and we're very transparent. And we told them, like, we're going to be the earliest 2026, right, to supply you with nickel. And they said, wow, you're faster than everybody else that we've been talking to. So these people are prepared to looking 5 to 10 years out to supply their nickel demand. I think that says two things. Number one, all the available nickel in the next 3 years is all spoken for, first of all. And secondly, these industry people, they see that there is not other technology that will be replacing all their nickel. They don't have enough nickel for their next 5 years, despite whatever current available supply stockpile and all other technologies that are maybe superior. But despite all that, they still are looking for nickel for up to 2032. So that tells us that, and I think these nickel, you know what, in the end, I think these auto manufacturers, they're doing 10, 20 million cars a year. I think they're going to be quite smart in diversifying their fuel options, right? And so at the very least, you know, we've seen some of the biggest top 5 and top 10, they're looking up to 2032. And they're telling us they need 100,000 tons of nickel, 200,000 tons of nickel. That's how much nickel goes into the EV industry today. So they're needing double or triple of what they need. And you know, I think the discussions are ongoing, and they're not deterred by the current nickel price. So it's really, I think, a sector that your investor can look into instead of betting Tesla versus Volkswagen, right, versus BYD, as you had mentioned. There's a bit of a turmoil in BYD right now with Warren Buffett. So I think that's a technology part of it, of which I don't pretend to know very well, Sam.
Why has it been decimated?
Well, if you just pull up the price of nickel in the last 10 years, there was the price of nickel today is what it was 15 years ago. Okay, I think there's two reasons. Well, the biggest reason, because it's the advent of the nickel laterite. So nickel laterite used to be regardless waste, and then China. It's a bit of a long, but nickel laterite, the way you can extract nickel out of nickel laterite is literally burn it, and it's very energy intensive. It's very high carbon emission. So nickel laterite, once China started burning that without environmental regards, doubled the nickel production. So all the nickel come out of the ground, new nickel coming out of the ground from mines are in laterite market, where nickel prices went from $10, $15 to less than $5. So up to 3 years ago, Sam, nickel was trading at $5 a pound. And then because of the advent of the EV from 2017, you started seeing creeping up with the nickel of that nickel demand coming from EV. So even though it's a small, less than 10% of the overall nickel consumption, but that's eating away that spare inventory. So you start nickel seeing there's a direct correlation, literally hand in hand between the nickel going into EV versus nickel price. Okay. And that's why to the point, that inflection point a year ago, when Elon Musk said that, buy as much nickel, I'm going to eat all the nickel you want. And then Elon Musk started going on the shopping spree in Madagascar, in Vale, in Thailand. Yeah. And I think that's really breaking up some nickel investors. But in the end, it's the Volkswagens, is some of that EV battery manufacturers that started tying up nickel production. So they're going Vale, just say, you know what, I want 20% of our nickel production. So all of a sudden, the nickel used to be available for the stainless steel industries being withdrawn from the market. And that's why it went to that tipping point in March, just 4 months ago, when nickel price went up 5-fold in less than 1 week.
But that was part of obviously the Russia issue as well, right?
Not so much to do with Russia. That sort of that created a bit of
doesn't a lot of the nickel come from Ukraine though?
Nickel, that created a talking point, but the LME, as I'm aware of right now, still takes nickel from Russia. Even if it's saying, I'm going to ban nickel from Russia, just I'm going to ban oil from Russia, right? There's guys that are in the industry, you change your flags 2, 3, 4 times. And there are people who make, one of my friends make $50 million. It's not a joke. Yeah. He made $50 million of Russian oil because he has freight companies of 3 or 4 different jurisdictions. In the end, the oil, he officially buys at 50 cents on the dollar from Russia, eventually made its way through to Europe. So there's a will, there's always a way.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
We talked to the GMs of Volkswagen. We talked to the LGs in Equipro. So, absolutely.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
The Japanese, I think the Japanese has been late to the game, and they are sweating big time, Sam. So they are having a lot of problems.
So what about with getting nickel? Are they having issues with getting enough nickel?
Sam, all the nickel in Japan, they're all smelted by Sumitomo. And they've invested very, very heavily on nickel laterites. So their main sources of nickel are from Philippines, Indonesia, and Madagascar. But if you do a bit of Google, you'll see that they are now getting pressure from the Japanese government, and because of all the carbon footprint, a lot of the companies are saying we're going to go carbon zero, okay, by 2030, by 2050. How are we going to do that? It's impossibility. So they have severed a lot of their existing partnership with Vale, and now they are like, oh my God, they are in a nickel deficit. So they're late to the game. Whereas I think the Koreans are a lot more aggressive, and but I think the Japanese, I really seeing that the next phase, the next wave, Sam, about phase would be the Hondas and the Toyotas, and just the Japanese embarking on this ESG, environmental, social standards. So in that sense, companies like our company will be measured by a unit, how much carbon footprint in units per unit production. It's going to be like your nutritional table. And even in the investment community, they are measuring this matrix against their investment mandates. So I think you're going to see in the next few years, the Japanese is going to really turn this EV space, quite upside down, because as you know, the Hondas, the Toyotas, and Nissans, they're playing catch up, not only from market share, but from their supply chain. And now they're only beginning to, guys we talked to that never gave us the time of the day 6 months ago. They just did a site visit in our project a month ago. And they're really had an about face, an epiphany in sourcing not only nickel, but clean nickel. I think that's a big differentiate you're going to make. So I think they're getting pretty good at building nuclear power plants. They're very good at building roads, but they have really failed in the semiconductor despite how much they tried. They also spend a lot of money on fossil fuel engines, and they just couldn't get inroads with that. And I think with the advent of the EV, the number of parts required, as you know, is probably a small factor, a fraction of what the ICE entails. And so I think that is one area they really thought that they could make a lot of advance, and which they have. I mean, if you look at BYD, they're the top 5 EV manufacturers in the world now, trailing over to Volkswagen and Tesla.
Second now, yeah.
Oh,
Second.
they're second. Okay.
They've jumped above Volkswagen now. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that that race is over. I don't think that Volkswagen has any chance of catching BYD. It's BYD is just acting too fast. They're just moving too fast. They're in Europe. You know how long it takes them? I mean, Berlin's airport, it took 19 years to get approval. 19 years. In China, what are they, 6 months? You know, the Tesla battery, the PG&E. Once we have say 50 million cars plugged into the grid, they can be used as peaker plants. So that can solve, those extreme heat waves or those extreme no wind, no sun days for say a week or something. They can be solved because there's going to be so many. You have BYD batteries, right? Last for 1 million miles. What are you going to do with them after the car's
that's fascinating thought. I haven't given a thought about it. But the struggle is, though, let me share. The struggle here we have today is if you were to put a lithium battery farm next to there's several mega solar farms in Nevada. We have a project in Nevada. We see that literally a kilometer long of solar farms. If you plug like a lithium solar city battery farm in there, did you know something up to 30% of the power is for internal power consumption for these batteries because they need cooling. In Nevada, when you go up to 90 degrees, these batteries need to be refrigerated. So up to 30% of these batteries in lithium batteries right now,
but what's the battery chemistry they're using? Because I think you'll find that with like when they're using the newer, the better thermal managed LFP batteries, they don't need as much cooling. So those energy need will decrease significantly. A lot of that I think is using old battery technology, which I think
possible.
Yeah, it could be part of it. But
yes.
I was going to talk to you about your nickel. Now,
yes,
nickel, I think there's the perception that there'll be a deficit of nickel over the next 10 years, that there'll be a shortfall, which there obviously is right now, which has driven the price to crazy levels. And I'm assuming you're probably making good money from the current nickel price.
It's up and down. It's gone from $10 a pound to $50 a pound, and now it's back to $10 a pound. It's done a round trip in the last 4 months.
Okay.
Also, Sam, I think nickel, there's the ESG nickel versus the dirty nickel. That's going to make a huge difference. I don't think Tesla is going to be able to buy nickel from laterite from Indonesia and from Philippines, and that account for half of the current nickel production. So I don't think not all nickels are created equal. And there's just not enough nickels, and plus nickel is being in deficit since 2021. There are a lot of factors to be content with.
The other thing is, though, I think the number of batteries being created will increase. Therefore, the nickel market, I don't think it's going to die, but I do think it won't be as big as people think. And the reason for that is the rise of obviously LFP batteries, which I've talked about on my channel many times. I believe are taking over the large majority, not all, but probably 70% of the electric vehicle market. The other reason is because you don't need a lot of nickel in the manganese batteries with the manganese cathode. So the nickel content is significantly reduced. And if you do that, it also reduces significantly the amount of lithium you need. So obviously LFP batteries, the one drawback they have is they need more lithium than a ternary battery. So a traditional, NCMA or NCA battery. So the nickel content, I believe Tesla's right now developing cathodes that use less nickel and use more manganese. And Elon's spoken about that. So that will be one of the reasons. But the thing is, of course, there's going to be more batteries created, much more than there is today. So there'll still be nickel needed for a lot of them, but I just don't think it's going to increase as much as people think. That's my prediction.
You know what? You're on par with a lot of points. One thing about MNC, the market standards, at least up to about a year ago, from LG, of which is the standard for Tesla, MNC is 811. So you have 8 units of nickel going with 1 unit of manganese and 1 unit of cobalt. Yeah. So right now, nickel is the dominant. I'm not a big bull of lithium because there are a lot of it's one of the most abundant materials on Earth. But I think if you're looking into play the common denominator, making a bet on EVs, of which there's a lot of different manufacturers now catching up to Tesla. But I think in terms of metal, nickel is probably one of the most, one of the safer bet than lithium or cobalt. But manganese, again, is something that's quite abundant. But talking about LFP for a second, because we also talked to a lot of industry experts. If you look at, the way I look at it, it's like a Lamborghini versus a Golf, right?
Yeah, I agree.
But the difference is a Golf is a fifth the cost of Lamborghini, whereas if you look at the highest performing battery, say a Model 3 or the latest Type S Plaid, it's got about maybe 100 to 150 pounds of nickel that going into it. 150 pounds of nickel, at today's price is 1,500. So even if the price of nickel were to theoretically double, okay, just for the sake of argument,
yeah.
So the cost you're looking at is going from $1,500 to $3,000. It's a cost of like $1,500. That is like a carbon trim option of your but the performance, endurance, intensity, I think LFP has some room to catch. I am not sure if the technologies ever get to that point.
I don't think that ternary batteries will be needed, except in the 5% premium market, the $100,000 plus Plaid models, and those are going to be the ones where they're like, well, we can charge in 3 minutes, we can do, that I see happening. But I just think the majority of the market doesn't need anything more than LFP.
I hear you, especially also if you look at the Asia market where there's populous countries like Indonesia and India, they don't need a big, I think, it's the lowest cost denominator. But remember though, Sam, you also have the truck industry, right? So I think there are some very specific applications that require high density, quick discharge. Again, I'm not sure the nuances, how fast does LFPs catch up. And then also the aerospace industry, where you have these taxis.
That's where it will be used. Yeah, for sure.
They're delivering Uber, they're doing Amazon parts, either man or man taxis. So I think there's another dimension of use for batteries that are really sort of yet to be.
You make a good point. I mean, if we're already at 400 watt per kilo now, that's where Musk said aviation industry needs to be
airborne.
Yeah.
Yes.
So within 5 years, maybe there'll be a transformation there between.
Oh, I think there's already pilots out there in Europe that are making these air taxis, and they're going to.
There's one in Sydney as well in Australia. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at some Asian metropolis like Philippines, or like it would get you 2 hours to get to the airport. So, I'm not that concerned about.
If you think of the cost of aviation fuel, it will save them huge amounts of money. So I think that'll be a big industry for it. You're right. I agree with that. Yeah. I don't know how big that market is. That'd be interesting to see. In China last year, 12 months ago, ternary batteries dominated the market. Within 12 months, it's gone the opposite way, 65% to LFP. So I don't know how quickly it's going to happen in the rest of the world. But if you think about it, like look at the warranty problems that these companies are having with LG batteries, with having fires in the batteries. If you switch to LFP, good chance you significantly. If you've got a $1 million LFP battery and you're the company selling that, you're going to save yourself a lot of money in warranty claims.
Appreciate your time.
See you, mate.
Thoroughly enjoy. Have a good morning.
Bye.